Hey guys, how's it going? Gookil here for Diablo 3 Season 6. Today we're going to be talking about Demon Hunter support, which is an idea that was founded in Season 5 when Demon Hunters really fell off of the group play meta. Everybody had assumed going into Season 5 that Shadow, Impale, Demon Hunter was going to have a permanent place in group play, and that didn't actually wind up happening with the revealing of what can happen when you spam abuse health globes along with ignore pain and using energy twister. But since that's changed and there's been a few nerfs put in place on the PTR, it looks like Demon Hunter support is going to actually be very viable when it comes to group play for Diablo Season 6. And to show you guys a little bit about what I'm talking about, I'm going to open up the leaderboards on the PTR. I'm going to bring up the 4-player group play, and as you can see here, there is a Greater Rift 108 clear here with a support Demon Hunter. As well, Demon Hunter also shows up as the number 5 clear. You can see that there's already some gaps for people whose accounts have probably been suspended in the ban wave. But as we go through here, you can see that Demon Hunter is actually a pretty prevalent class in the 4-player meta, which is super encouraging because that means that after getting neglected for the last 2 seasons, we're going to actually be able to fill in a role, even though it's not the ideal role that I think you envision a Demon Hunter being, which is shooting out lots of arrows and doing a lot of damage. It's still able to function in a support role. Now, support has a lot of things to talk about, and I'm not going to be able to talk about it all in a single video because that would put this video at easily over 30 minutes when we start talking about how to actually play it, combined with gear, skill, and everything to do with that. So what I'm going to focus on first with this video is just the gear that you're going to be looking for, because that's the most important thing when it comes to Season 6. You want to have a goal gear list to be able to achieve so that you can get right into pushing 4-player Greater Rifts as fast as possible to really start pushing your way up the Paragon levels and increasing your character power overall. So let's talk about the gear first and how some of it is going to synergize with each other. As you can see, the one thing that's going to already stand out as kind of a pain to get is the Illusory boots, which only come from the Act 2 bounty caches or the Act 4 bounty cache, which has the capability of getting any of the other acts legendaries in it. But reliably, you're going to be able to find this in Act 2. And the reason we want this is because when we're playing support, we really don't want to get boxed in by mobs. And what I mean by that is you don't want to be in a spot where you're cornered, where you're pushed up against a wall, and you can't get out and be able to support your team. So this gives you the ability to be able to actually walk through enemies. Now remember, we will be able to vault, but because of the fact that we're not using Unhallowed Essence, we're not going to have an unlimited supply of discipline to be able to vault through everything. So it's important to have these so that you don't waste discipline on vaulting where you don't actually need to. One of the biggest toughness boosts that comes for using a support Demon Hunter is by combining the 2-piece Martyrs, which allows you to have all of your companions, along with Zoe's Secret Belt, and as well as Cloak of Garwolf. And the reason why this is important is because it gives you a static, constant buff of toughness. As you can see, my character right now is sitting in town at 451 million toughness, which I would actually even venture to say, without augments and everything else, is actually pretty low. But you're going to need to have probably close to pushing 800,000 to 1 billion, 800 million to 1 billion toughness in order to capably survive in pushing through Greater Rifts 100 and above. And the best way that we can achieve that is by making sure that we have this static boost with these 4 pieces of combined gear, as well as making sure that we have all resist gems in every single gear socket. Another important item to have is the St. Archu's Gauge, which is, I'm sure, a pair of gloves that you see a lot in your journeys and you end up salvaging a lot because it doesn't really have use offensively, but defensively it's actually very, very valuable. Its secondary effect of the first time an elite pack damages you, you gain an absorb shield equal to 120% of your maximum life for 10 seconds is absolutely fantastic when we're spending our time actually rolling our gear to make sure that we maximize how much life that we do have. So for right now, this character has 1.4 million health. So if you're gaining and absorb shield equal to 120% of your maximum life for 10 seconds. That's quite a lot of health that they have to chip through. It's going to help you really feel indestructible in group play, which is important because you don't want your supports dying all over the place in your group, because that means that your damage is going to die, and that means that ultimately your group is going to fail. This is by far and away the best in slot gloves that you can have. It outweighs everything else, and it's important to try and maximize the rules for survivability on all pieces of gear, really trying to get as much dexterity, vitality, resist all, and cooldown reduction as a combination. Offensive stats aren't very helpful for most of the gear that you're going to be looking at. Leoric's Crown comes in as the best helmet you could possibly have, simply because of its effect of increasing the effect of any gem socketed into this item. Now, this one isn't actually rolled properly. I would re-roll the elemental arrow damage to all resist, and then making sure we have our cooldown gem in there. And the reason that we want to maximize cooldown, when we talk about skills a little bit later, is we want to make sure that we are constantly able to put up sentries, and the only way that we can make sure that our sentries are constantly going up and making sure that our wolf companion has as close to 100% uptime is by making sure we maximize cooldown. Now, I don't actually have the best amulet here. If you could get an amulet that is able to have a socket as well as maximizing defensive stats such as vitality, resist all, cooldown reduction, anything that could contribute to that is going to be the best. This is unfortunately the best amulet that I've been able to find. If you could get a Hellfire amulet that has those statistics as well as a good passive, then that is likely going to be close to a secondary best in slot. But really, your best in slot neck pieces are going to be one of the resist amulets that has those defensive stats as well as a socket in it, so that you could put a legendary gem. This is just a placeholder so that I can actually have a legendary gem, and this just so happens to be the best necklace that I had on hand. This build is using Nemesis bracers, and ideally, you don't want all of your supports to have Nemesis bracers, so this piece here is going to take a little bit of communication with your team as to who is actually going to be using the Nemesis bracers in this situation. Based on what I've seen on the leaderboards, Demon Hunter appears to be using the Nemesis bracers. Now, obviously, with this gear, I would roll that lightning % damage to all resist, but the reason being is that when you're trying to push through Greater Rifts, you're going to get the most progress from elites, and you're not going to get it from white mobs. So the ability to be able to pop shrines and be able to spawn an elite pack is going to help your overall rift progress, and it is great for farming rifts, especially when you're able to efficiently clear in about 5 to 6 minutes to really maximize XP farming. For your quiver and your weapon, your quiver really comes down to what can you get the best stats for it when it comes to your Bombardier's rucksack. This one obviously looks a little bit more offensively based. Ideally, I don't want to have critical hit chance on this and have some sort of other skill, but this just happened to be the best one that I could find. The reason we want Bombardier's rucksack is that we can have more sentries out, and with the skill that we're using, more sentries means actually more damage reduction for you and your party. This happens to be the best one that I have, so this is what I'm using. And then for your weapon, you want to make sure that you have Calamity equipped. Ideally, you can actually roll away your damage range on this for better defensive statistics, because it really doesn't matter how much damage you wind up doing. It's about your ability to survive as well as your ability to maximize the use of your skills. The reason we use a Calamity is because we make all enemies become a hit and take marked for death, which is a big damage boost for your group, and it's going to spread throughout all enemies because we're using multi-shot, and it really doesn't have a suitable replacement right now. And then last to talk about is the rings. The rings could change a little bit based on what you find and what you have in your cube, but the ones that I have equipped in this build are having Elusive Ring equipped. Ideally, again, as you can see, the stats aren't the best rolled. You want to have more defensive stats, but it's important to make sure that you have a socket as well as having some form of cooldown reduction on your ring. And then using Oculus Ring, which procs every time a monster is killed and damage is increased by 83%, or it's actually a damage range here of 70 to 85% while standing in the area, which again is just a huge boost to your overall group damage. So if we come down here and actually take a look at the Canai's Cube, what we're going to be using here is we're going to be using Odyssey's End, which means enemies snared by your entangling shot take 25% increased damage from all sources, which is a skill that we will be using. Having Wraps of Clarity, where your hatred generators reduce your damage taken by 35% for 5 seconds, again adding to that survivability boost that we need in order to be able to survive. And remember, Demon Hunters do not have the melee characters' automatic damage reduction. For example, monks, barbarians, and crusaders all get a passive damage reduction buff. We don't have that, so we have to overcompensate in that with skill as well as with gear. And then in the ring slot, and this is where I was saying, if you find a good ring, you could actually put Elusive Ring and sub in Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac onto your character, but we need to have Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac because every time we use a resource spending attack, it will reduce the cooldown of skills by 1 second, which is important when it comes to maximizing our sentries and our Wolf Companion. That pretty much touches the gear part of things. When it comes to legendary gems are going to be based around making sure that we are increasing the survivability of our character, increasing the damage taken from mobs so that the group is more powerful, and as well maximizing cooldown reduction so that we have 100% uptime on our abilities. So the gems that are being used are Gem of Effacious Toxin, which the key thing that we're looking for here is that all enemies you poison take 10% increased damage from all sources. So anytime we hit an enemy, it becomes poison, it takes 10% more damage. We're using Gogok of Swiftness, which means that we gain 1% cooldown reduction per stack, which we increase stacks by using attacks. So if we have 15 stacks constantly rolling, we're getting 15% extra cooldown reduction. And then lastly, Esoteric Alteration, which we want to just get this gem as maxed out as possible because it's going to reduce non-physical damage as well as the secondary effect of a below 50% life, which hopefully we're not ever there. But if we are below 50% life, our resistances to all elements will be increased by 75%, which is pretty big. If you're looking here, you can see that we are sitting at about average 1300 resist all for every single element. So now let's take a look at skills, guys, and this is where we'll talk about skills and how they work together with your gear to make this such a powerful support class. And then in the next video, we'll talk about gameplay and how you can actually position yourself to make yourself a better player for your group. So our primary attacks that we're using is Entangling Shot, Justice is Served. The reason we're using this is because it will increase our hatred generated to 7, which is important because we want to be able to use multi-shot as often as possible, and the only way we're going to be able to do that is by getting maximum hatred regeneration. And the big reason for using Entangling Shot is because it synergizes extremely well with Odyssey's End, which means that every enemy that is snared by Entangling Shot takes 25% increased damage. Our Spender skill is Multi-Shot Wind Chill, and the reason for this is that enemies that are chilled have a 15% increased chance to be critically hit for 3 seconds, which is important for your damage dealer in your group because they're obviously going to be the ones dealing the bulk of the damage. Especially if you're running with 3 supports, they'll be dealing all of your damage. So having a 15% increased chance to critically hit is a huge bonus, as well as multi-shot being able to spray through enemies means that there are going to be more enemies hit by Marked for Death. The Wolf Companion is used primarily so that the group can constantly have a 30% increased damage boost for 10 seconds. And if we're timing everything right, if we have the proper gear, if we're timing our Gogok of Swiftness stacks all together, we basically will always have this up, which means your group is constantly going to be dealing 30% increased damage. As you can start to see here, hopefully in this video, you can see that we have a lot of ways to make damage be increased that are stacking on top of one another, which is how your damage dealers are going to be able to deal that much damage by themselves to mobs in Greater Rifts. We're using Vault Rattling Roll. The reason for this is that enemies that you vault are stunned, which is important because obviously when monsters can't attack, they aren't dealing damage to you or especially your damage dealer. So you want to make sure that you're vaulting at the right times to cause the right stun so that mobs don't attack your damage dealer. So it's good if, say, hey, your damage dealer's in a bit of trouble, I'm trying to get into a corner, make sure that you vault through enemies to help get them to that corner so that they stop attacking, even if it's brief. Sentry Guardian Turret is really where we're going to be able to maximize most of our damage reduction. For every turret that we have out, the turret creates a shield that reduces damage taken by allies by 25%. And with custom engineering, as well as Bombardier's Rucksack, we can have up to 5 sentries out at one time, which is a huge space of physical area on the map to be able to have damage reduction or being able to stack them one on top of the other. That's going to be primarily every single time you're doing a pull in a Greater Rift, you want to make sure that you get the pull in a position and then start dropping Guardian turrets so that you and your entire party are taking reduced damage. And then lastly, Mark for Death Contagion, which is when an enemy is killed, the mark spreads to the closest 3 enemies, and enemies take an additional 20% damage for 30 seconds. And you might be wondering why we have Mark for Death when we already have Mark for Death coming out from Calamity. Well, the reason being is that Mark for Death Calamity actually stacks with the skill, which means that if you are attacking mobs as you should be, and then also using it in combination with Mark for Death, mobs are taking an additional 40% increased damage instead of just 20% from the Calamity. For our skills and passives, we are going to be using Perfectionist, which is, for us, it is to make sure that we have a reduced discipline cost so that we can vault more, as well as having higher armor and resistance, which is just increasing our toughness passively. We're using Numbing Traps, which means at any time that we have enemies that are slow or chilled by sentries, especially, they have their damage reduced by 25% for 5 seconds, which is what we're using in combination with our Sentry Guardian turret here. Custom Engineering means that we are going to be able to have more sentries out, and then Awareness is just used because, hey, you know what, things happen. Ultimately, if a support goes down, it is a big blow to the group to get them back up as fast as possible. It shouldn't happen very often, but if it does, it's much better to have this safety net where you can just stay alive and be able to be immune for 2 seconds, regenerate life. Hopefully in that time you can hit your potion and get to a safer place. So guys, that pretty much covers gear and skills and gems for what you want to be using for the Demon Hunter support in Season 6. In the next video, we'll talk about actual gameplay and how you can maximize your skill as a Demon Hunter to benefit the rest of your party. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm looking forward to Season 6 Demon Hunter, and I'll catch you guys on the next video.